I rise for truth and accountability. That's why we're here. We're dealing with common criminals. You see a guy running down the street in a city with a television on his back, strapped to it, you start to wonder. We have had enough of those incidents to indicate to us that's what we're dealing with. The gravest attack ever on the U.S. democracy came 288 days ago. It was born of lies. Steve Bannon spread those poisonous lies, and Bannon was guided by the dictator. We must pursue the truth. We go only where the facts take us. Refusing a subpoena is an obstructing justice. We don't allow the plaintiff, the prosecutor to decide. We decide it through the courts. If you can't take the Constitution, go to Russia. It shows you have something to hide. What are you hiding? This is a vote of conscience.
Members are reminded to direct their remarks to the chairs. The time, members' time is expired.
I can give 15 seconds.
Thank you.
Gentleman's recognized for additional 15 seconds.
Thank you. Refusing subpoena is obstructing justice. This is a vote of conscience. Do you agree with the rioting terrorists or our democracy? Are we a country of laws or a country of men? Or we must hold all involved accountable. This includes those who attack the police and those organizers who spread the lies, and the president who organized it. This is America, not
time
Russia.
has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong support of this rule and the underlying resolution. There are moments in our country's history when we are presented with stark choices, choices between right and wrong. And the violence of January 6th has made it clear that we're at such a moment. January 6th was a shocking assault on our government. On the orders of the former president, thousands of rioters destroyed public property, gravely injured police officers, terrorized lawmakers, and invaded the Capitol to halt the certification of the Electoral College required by the Constitution. That day cannot be minimized or swept under the carpet because the forces that inspired it, that inspired that attack, are still stoking the fires of chaos and conspiracy. Congress has tasked a bipartisan select committee with investigating the January 6th attack, and that committee has outlined why it needs Steve Bannon's testimony to fully understand the events leading up to that attack. However, when subpoenaed to testify, Mr. Bannon told the select committee to pound sand. Mr. Bannon is a private citizen. He is not above the law and cannot refuse to obey a subpoena any more than you or I or any American can. Neither Mr. Bannon nor the former president have made any credible legal arguments to shield his testimony. Patriotism demands that anyone with knowledge of that dark day come forward, and the rule of law and our Constitution demand that everyone in this Congress support this investigation. I'm incredibly disappointed that Republican leadership and so many of their colleagues continue to oppose any attempt to investigate the January 6th attack. They oppose legislation to create a bipartisan commission. They oppose the creation of the Select Committee, and they're now trying to prevent the committee from carrying out its work. This is not a time for games or delays, all of which have allowed the former president and his allies like Mr. Bannon to escape accountability thus far. This is a time for courage. The courage to protect our Constitution and our national integrity. I'm grateful to the members of the Select Committee for having the courage to put loyalty to country over partisan politics. Mr. Speaker, I strongly urge all of my colleagues to support this rule.
I thank the distinguished gentleman and chair of the Rules Committee for yielding and for his leadership. The House is a separate and co-equal branch of government. We are the institution that is closest to the people. The House has a sacred obligation under the Constitution to defend our democracy, and we should be doing that in a bipartisan way. But something has happened to the modern-day Republican Party. The party of Abraham Lincoln is gone. The party of Ronald Reagan is gone. The party of John McCain is gone. And a cult of personality has risen up to take its place. Is that why my colleagues refuse to denounce the former president's lie uttered today, that the real insurrection was on November 3rd? Take back your party. You can start today. You can start right here. You can start by holding Steve Bannon accountable for his blanket defiance of a congressional subpoena. What is wrong with Steve Bannon? There is no cult exception to the United States Constitution. There is a legitimate bipartisan congressional investigation that is underway into the violent insurrection and attack on the Capitol on January 6th. It was an assault on the Congress, the Constitution, and the country. A lawful subpoena has been issued that Steve Bannon should comply with. We must hold Steve Bannon accountable for his blanket defiance of a congressional subpoena, for undermining the rule of law, and for obstructing a congressional investigation, because in America, no one is above the law.
I rise in support of the rule and the underlying resolution. I want to start by saying this is not just about Mr. Bannon. This is about our rule of law, our democracy, and protecting it for future generations. On January 6th, the mob, incited by the lies of a political leader, descended on the Capitol. Nooses, vandalism, death threats to elected officials. Americans remember the violence that took place here. Beltway chatter often focuses on the winners and losers of the day, but on that day, we all lost. Americans lost their lives, and we nearly lost our democracy. That is why we created the bipartisan January 6th Commission. We know that unless we do our jobs, the ultimate losers will be future generations who will wonder what happened to our nation. The Commission's work is serious and has no time for the games of Mr. Bannon or anyone else who would disregard the rule of law. Our Constitution and our courts have made it clear that Congress has the power to investigate. This power is vital to the protection of our democracy, and it must be respected. You know, I think a lot about our late, dear colleague, Elijah Cummings, and his words still sit with me. He said, when we're dancing with the angels, the question will be asked, what did we do to make sure we kept our democracy intact? I stand before you with that quote on my heart, thinking of my own 4 grandchildren, and when they learn of January the 6th, they will see a time when America descended into violence, destruction, desecration, when Americans attacked Americans and threatened our democracy. And what did I do? What did we all do to protect our democracy? So I lend my voice to hold Mr. Bannon in contempt and support the Bipartisan Select Committee for their work in keeping our democracy and our future intact. I yield back.
Mr. Speaker, this resolution ought to be supported, and the underlying action that the rule provides for ought to be supported by every member of this House that believes that this House has a constitutional responsibility of oversight, of protecting the Constitution, the democracy in which we are all privileged to live, and the integrity of this House. Oversight is not possible for this House if, in fact, it cannot request and indeed demand the testimony of those who have information on which this House, the People's House, the protector of our democracy and our Constitution, need to protect our democracy. This rule and the underlying action for which it provides is essential. And Mr. Speaker, if I were trying a case I would offer as Exhibit A a statement by the man who would be dictator, Donald J. Trump, who absurdly and, of course, incorrectly says the insurrection took place on November 3rd, Election Day. January 6th was the protest. My view is that man, Donald J. Trump, protests too much. Because I believe that he recruited, incited, and deployed an insurrectionist mob to threaten this institution, its members, its constitutional responsibility in the electoral process of the presidency of the United States, and democracy itself. Mr. Speaker, the events of January 6th expose threats to our democracy that must be fully understood and addressed. A weighty responsibility that falls to the House's Select Committee on the January 6th attack on the Capitol, the bipartisan committee. I want to thank Chairman Thompson, Vice Chair Cheney, and all those serving on this committee for their commitment to seeking the truth and defending our democracy. And to giving sufficient information to our public, our constituents, our people, that they know this to be a stark and dangerous lie. The committee is doing a diligent job at finding the truth. This task should not have fallen to the members of the Select Committee, this subpoena and contempt. We should have been able to come together, Democrats and Republicans, to create a bipartisan commission in the style of the 9/11 Commission, recognizing that such consequential, transformative attacks require us to come together as one nation, indivisible, to seek answers and identify solutions to make our country safer. Sadly, however, we have come to a place where one party is so focused on defending the indefensible that this institution cannot act as Americans, but rather are relegated to acting simply as partisans. Nevertheless, Mr. Speaker, I'm heartened to see Democrats and some courageous Republicans working together to uncover the truth of what happened that day. These Republican members are exhibiting what President Kennedy would call profiles in courage. In order for this committee to perform its work in full, indeed any committee of the Congress to perform its work in full, ultimately it has to be able to get the information that it needs from those who know the information it needs. It must hear testimony from all those who may have information regarding the events of January 6th in this particular case. That's why we provided the committee with subpoena authority. Steve Bannon's refusal to appear, even when subpoenaed, is a demonstration of his contempt, not only for Congress, but his contempt of the Constitution and his contempt for the law. It is unacceptable and obstructive to this process of uncovering the full story of that day's attack on the Capitol. He must be found in contempt, not as a Democrat, not as a Republican, but on behalf of this institution and the people that we represent. Withholding information on the events of that day from the committee is no less than an act of betrayal of the American people and of our constitutional democracy. The American people need to understand what led to the violent insurrection that sought to overturn our election and led to the deaths of multiple police officers and others. Although, as I said, Exhibit A, the former president's comments, should be proof in and of itself. The American people need to understand what led to the deaths of those police officers and the placing at risk of the democratic process of electing a president of the United States. We need to understand, Mr. Speaker, how this could have happened, why it happened, and what ought to be done to hold the perpetrators accountable and prevent the events of the day from being repeated. That appears to be the fear on the floor of this House today. Accountability, responsibility, consequences. In refusing to appear before the commission, Mr. Bannon has made it clear where his loyalties lie. He's chosen Trump first and America last. Not America first. Trump first, America last. Trump first, our Constitution last. Trump first, our democracy last. Trump first, the House of the people. This House of Representatives last. And he will have to answer for that choice. This is a moment of reckoning for our country, reckoning with hard truths and painful memories, reckoning that above all requires truth and understanding. Can't we, Mr. Speaker, in a bipartisan way, summons the courage to look the truth in the eye and vote the truth? We cannot allow anyone to shirk their responsibility to share that truth and help the American people understand. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I urge the House to vote yes on this resolution and to vote yes on the citation for contempt, so that Chairman Thompson, Vice Chairwoman Cheney, and the members of the Select Committee can make it clear to Mr. Bannon and to all others summoned to testify they will seek the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, as they determine what we must do to protect our beloved country, our beloved Constitution, and our beloved democracy. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. They won't question Trump's statement that the insurrection was November 3rd because that's the day each and every one of them and each and every one of us was elected. It was a free and fair election when it came to electing Congress people, but for some reason, President, they think it was an insurrection. Horse manure. Bannon, who is thumbing his nose at the Constitution and this Congress by not responding to his subpoena, said that it would be different on Election Day, on January 6th. It wouldn't go as expected because he was part of plotting what was an overthrow of our government. He was pardoned by President Trump for ripping off Trump supporters. He got them to give money to an effort to build the wall, and he took over $1 million for his own personal expenses. Fraud. But Trump didn't care that he ripped off Trump people for a Trump wall. He pardoned him. The whole thing is a con game, and we need to end it before democracy goes out the window. I urge you to support the rule and the underlying resolution. Protect America and protect democracy. I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Speaker, I often quote George Santayana, who warned, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." The insurrection on January 6th was the worst attack on our Constitution since the Civil War. While the secessionists were defeated in 1865, our nation's experiment with multiracial democracy during Reconstruction did not last. It was extinguished by the lost cause mythology that minimized the evils of the secessionists and raised monuments to the leaders of the Confederacy that they established. These willful circumventions and misrepresentations were used as justification for avoiding accountability and violently stripping African Americans of constitutional rights. We are at risk of repeating that history today. Just as the lost cause laid the ideological groundwork for Jim Crow and all its inhumanities, the big lie seeks to justify nullification laws that seek to suppress votes and establish autocratic rule. The former president and his enablers are using the big lie to deny the horror of January 6th. They are attempting to obstruct and subvert the Select Committee's work and to prevent a full accounting of their efforts to undermine our democracy. We know from our history that when our government is attacked, failing to hold the perpetrators accountable emboldens them, allowing their myths to gain currency incentivizes them, and underestimating their disregard for their fellow citizens enables them to deny those citizens their constitutional rights. I urge the adoption of this resolution so that we avoid repeating the past, or at least that part of our past that dehumanizes our fellow citizens. We must act to strengthen our democracy and build a better future for our country so that it can once again be the envy of the world. With that, I yield back.